The sun hadn't yet crested the hills when Hannah Moore stepped outside, her boots cracking the brittle grass beneath her feet. The land stretched in every direction, dry, cracked, and stubborn, just like the life she now lived. A widow far too young by the town standards, too stubborn to remarry, too alone to be pitied. Since James died the winter before, fevered and fading fast while the preacher muttered prayers that never worked, Hannah had managed the ranch, alone. The townsfolk buried James quick and forgot him quicker. They hadn't forgotten Hannah, though. Whispers followed her when she passed. A woman like that should sell, they said. Move into town. Marry a decent man. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed out here past the mesquites, where only the brave or broken lived. This morning her well was nearly dry. The fence post wouldn't hold, and the buzzards had already begun their slow circles above the ridge. Hannah squinted at them, adjusted her straw hat, and pressed a hand to her damp forehead. Everything around her was drying out, her land, her body, her will. Then she saw it. At first, she thought it was just another bundle of refuse from travelers, perhaps a bedroll left behind by wanderers. But as she neared the slope behind the barn, her breath caught. A man, blood-soaked and still. He lay curled, like a discarded animal. His black hair matted with dust, his chest barely rising. His deer-hide shirt had been torn, his wound raw and deep enough to expose the bone. Then she saw the feather hanging from the beads at his neck, Apache. Every tale she'd heard as a child came rushing back. Raids, fires, kidnappings. She stepped back, heart hammering. No one would help her. Not the town, not the law. If she turned around now, no one would blame her. Maybe they'd even applaud, but she didn't turn. Instead, she went to the barn, filled a dented tin cup with the last of the well water, precious, dwindling, and returned to kneel beside the man. She didn't speak, didn't ask who he was. Just lifted his head gently and brought the cup to his lips. His eyes flickered open. Wild, dark, watching. Still, she waited. Then slowly, painfully, he drank. One sip, just one. But it was enough to change everything. When she rose and stepped back, her hands trembled. She expected violence, words, something. But he just watched her, silent, and exhaled, like her gift had soothed more than his thirst. Then he closed his eyes again. That night, sleep never came, and by dawn, the sound of hooves, dozens of them, echoed through the earth like a gathering storm. She had given water to a dying man, and now his people had come. Hannah stood on the porch, rifle in hand. Though she didn't know how to fire it, it steadied her. The morning air was thick with tension as the riders emerged over the ridge. No dust cloud, no noise, just the rhythmic thud of hooves like a drumbeat from the earth itself. She counted them in her head. Dozens. Warriors. Apache. Their silhouettes burned against the rising sun. She didn't run. The first rider passed the corral, then another, and another, encircling the house. The warriors' faces were painted in muted defiance, but not a single weapon was raised. They said nothing. Only one dismounted. Him. The man she had given water to. Pale, wounded, yet standing. He limped toward her. Hannah tightened her grip on the rifle. Her heart raced, but her eyes did not leave his. When he finally stopped in front of her, close enough to see the fatigue behind his dark gaze, he raised a hand. Not in aggression, but in recognition. "You saved," he said. "I protect." That was all. He turned to the others and spoke in his own tongue. Whatever he said made them lower their heads, then their weapons. They rode off as silently as they came, all except him. He stayed. He didn't ask. He simply walked to the barn, sat beneath the trough's shade, and leaned back like he had always belonged there. Hannah stood still for a long time, not from fear, but from a question she couldn't yet name. That day, he did not speak again, but he worked. Quietly, purposefully. Mended the broken fence post she'd fought with just yesterday. Chopped wood, despite his wound. Carried water. From the well with movement slow but unrelenting. When she told him to rest, he said simply, "You gave, I return." The rhythm continued over the next days. Silent, steady. Every task he took upon himself was done with care, like repayment of a debt written in the soil, but Dry Hollow noticed. Townsfolk always did. When Hannah went to town for flour and nails, the air went cold. Men at the general store muttered. One spat at her boots. Another called her Red Lover. Sheriff Maddox pulled her aside. He wasn't cruel, but he was. Cowardly. We've had reports, he said. Reports or gossip, she snapped. He winced. People are nervous. They say you're harboring an enemy. He's not an enemy. He was dying. I gave him water. That's what you call it now, one man sneered. She left chin high, coffee forgotten. That night she sat on the porch. Her Apache guest, still nameless, sharpened a knife with rhythmic focus. The moon was high. Crickets silent. The stillness before a storm. They think I'm a traitor, she said. He didn't look up. They think I'm sleeping with you. He paused. Words are smoke. Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll chase out of town. He stopped sharpening. You gave water to a dying man. That is not shame, that is root. Root? In my people, he said. A woman who gives water gives life. Not just to the body, but to the spirit. You gave what cannot be repaid. That night she couldn't sleep. Near midnight she heard them. Boots. Voices. Then the sound of the chicken coop door slamming open. Lantern light flickered through the cracks of her home. Shadows moved across her windows. She reached for the rifle again, still useless but something to hold. A scream rang out, then another. She ran barefoot into the yard. 5 men. Guns. Rope. A branding iron glowing red. One shouted, You in? There, Red Lover, come out. Before she could reply, the barn doors burst open. The Apache didn't run. He walked, deliberate like a panther already mid-leap. What happened next was fast, brutal, soundless almost. One man fell to the ground, gasping. Another was thrown back with a bone-cracking thud. The branding iron hissed in the dirt. The third man ran. The fourth whimpered. The fifth stood his ground. Brody. Of course it was him. Rich, entitled, predatory. He'd always wanted this land and Hannah. Now he came with fire. You think you scare me? Brody spat, leveling his gun. Takakota. She would finally learn. His name didn't flinch, he stepped forward. Bloodied, silent. Enough, he said. Brody sneered. You're lucky she's here, or I'd gut you. Then Hannah stepped forward, rifle raised, hands shaking. Try it, she said. The words stopped him cold. You wouldn't shoot me. I don't have to, she replied. He already spared you once. Takakota stood beside her like a wall. Brody looked between them, 2 people with no reason left to fear him, and backed away. This isn't over. You're right, Hannah said. It's just beginning. When the sun rose, the men were gone, the coop burned, the land scarred, but Hannah had never felt less alone. The days that followed passed quietly, on the surface, but silence, as Hannah had come to learn, was rarely still. It could carry weight, history, even a reckoning, especially on her ranch, where every sunrise now brought the sound of Takakota's footsteps before the fire, and every dusk ended with him sharpening tools beneath the barn's overhang. He moved like someone who expected danger behind every horizon, but never flinched when it arrived. He said little, worked often, and never once stepped inside the house, not even when thunderclouds swept in or winds pulled at the shutters. Still, Hannah found his presence grounding, as if the land itself had taken human shape and decided to stay. She stopped asking him to leave. Instead, she left out water and food. One morning, she noticed her boots cleaned and placed neatly beside the door. Another day, a broken drawer in the barn had been fixed without a word. There was no performance. No need for thanks, he simply acted, like someone honoring a promise only they remembered. Then came the town again. Hannah had gone into Dry Hollow for coffee and flour. She hadn't even stepped fully into the general store when the air turned. 3 men, all regulars, stood near. The back, ranchers hardened by drought and resentment. Their eyes followed her with unhidden judgment. Back from your secret war camp, Hannah? One of them muttered. She didn't reply. She picked up a sack of flour and walked toward the Counter, another voice cut in. They say you're keeping one of them out there, feeding him, sleeping with him. The words didn't sting. They scalded. But she didn't flinch. Not until the sheriff emerged from the back room, removing his glasses slowly like he wished. He hadn't heard. Miss Moore, Sheriff Maddox began, we've had reports. Reports, she repeated, flat and sharp. Or gossip, he sighed. You know how people get. Tensions are high. He's not an enemy. He was wounded. I gave him water. That's what you call it now, a man sneered behind her. Maddox raised his hand. Enough. She stared at him for a beat longer than comfort allowed, then left the store without the coffee. That night, she didn't speak much. She sat on the porch while Takakota carved something from a scrap of wood, his hands steady. She could feel his awareness shift even when he didn't raise his head. They think I'm a traitor, she said. He said nothing. They think I'm sleeping with you. Still, nothing. Then, words are smoke. She almost laughed. Easy for you to say. You gave water to a dying man. That is not shame. That is root. She looked at him. Root? In my people, water is life. A woman who gives water gives spirit. You gave what cannot be repaid. A silence settled between them. Deeper than judgment. Older than fear. Later, she found herself wandering into the barn where he had stored firewood. She noticed the scars along his arm. Old, raised, some straight, some jagged. Without thinking, she reached toward one. How did you get that? She asked softly. He paused. Then, I was 13. The soldiers came, said we stole cattle. We hadn't, but they burned our fields. Took my brother, set fire to the lodge. His voice remained even, but distant. My mother pushed me out. Told me to run. I didn't want to, but I did. A blade caught me here. He traced the scar. I bled under a cedar tree for 3 days. Hannah swallowed hard. And your mother? They left her in the ashes. Her hand fell to her side. I'm sorry, she whispered. You didn't do it. Doesn't mean I'm not sorry. He turned to her. That is why I stay. Because, sorry? No, he said. Because you remember what others choose to forget. That night it rained, not a drizzle. A true downpour. The cracked earth drank greedily. The porch roof leaked in 2 places, but she didn't care. She stood outside in the storm, water running through her hair, soaking through her dress. Takakota emerged from the barn and joined her. He lifted his face to the sky. No words, no gesture, just reverence. She followed. Together they stood in the mud, motionless, baptized by the sky. Later she tended to the wound on his shoulder. She used salves she made from beeswax and crushed herbs. As she pulled away the old bandage, she saw more scars, not just from soldiers. Some looked like arrow wounds, others deeper. She didn't ask. Instead, she whispered, Every scar is a story, isn't it? He nodded. And every story leaves a mark. He met her gaze. Some marks lead us to those who can carry them with us. She said nothing. But in her chest, something shifted. Not pity, not romance. Something quieter, steadier. The next morning she climbed to the loft above the barn, searching for thread, she told herself. But she found something else. A chest, an old envelope, a letter. She sat on the floor, sunlight leaking through the rafters, and unfolded the yellowed page. To Mr. Brody, it began. As discussed, I agree to the sale of the property at the offered price. Once my wife is informed, her heart stopped. James, her husband, he'd planned to sell the ranch before he died. Behind her back. To Brody, of all people. She read the letter again, then again. Her hands trembled. She stood too fast, the chest tipped. Old tools clattered to the floor. Takakota appeared in the doorway, alert. Hannah? She held up the letter. Her voice broke. He was going to sell this place to Brody, without telling me. Takakota took the page. Read it once. His face didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. You still have the land, he said. For now. If Brody kept a copy, he'll Come with papers with a judge. I thought James loved this place, she whispered. I thought he loved me. Takakota folded the letter and placed it gently on the table. He loved control, he said. Not land. Not you. His words weren't cruel. They were freeing. That evening, Hannah rode into town. Alone, she didn't tell Takakota, didn't ask permission. She wore her best dress, the one untouched since the funeral. She pinned her hair like she used to before grief dulled everything. Let them talk. At the courthouse, she asked to see Judge Leland. The clerk blinked. You got business, Miss Moore? She handed him the letter. 10 minutes later, she sat across from the judge. She laid the page on the desk. This was never filed. My husband intended to sell our land, but he died before it was signed. Now Brody's trying to take it, with intimidation. Leland examined the paper. Do you have proof? I have. Ashes on my porch, scars on my fence, he studied her. I'll look into it, he said. Back at the ranch, Takakota waited. She gave him the letter. It's not over, she said. But I'm not going to run. He nodded once, no smile, no praise, just presence. Then she stepped closer, placed her hand over his chest. I don't want to carry this alone anymore. He rested his hand over hers. No kiss, no promise. Just two people, wounded, whole, silent. But something had changed. The storm hadn't passed, but she was no longer facing it alone. Purpose, public confrontation, legacy shift, and vindication of quiet power dry. Hollow had gone quiet, but not in peace. The town's silence hummed like a drawn breath held too long. Whispers traveled quicker than horse hooves, curling around saloons, and church pews alike. Hannah Moore was no longer simply the widow. She was the woman harboring a warrior, and the town wasn't sure whether to fear her, scorn her, or drive her out altogether. On the porch, Hannah sat with a ledger in her lap, but her eyes drifted often to the road. Takakota was mending the water trough again. He moved with quiet precision, as if each nail driven into wood pushed back a ghost. She had come to depend on the silence between them. It was no longer a void. It was understanding. That evening, a noise beyond the gate drew her eyes. Sheriff Maddox rode up with two deputies, hats in hand, shoulders stiff with discomfort. We've had some complaints, Maddox said, stepping from his horse. Brody's stirred folks up again. He's still alive? Hannah asked coolly. Maddox half smiled. Barely, but he's talking about legal claims, property sales. Says your husband promised the land. He did, she said, pulling the folded letter from her pocket. He also died before he could file it. Maddox studied the page briefly. Judge Leland's looking into it, but Hannah, people are uneasy. Let them be. He sighed. Just be careful. That night after Maddox left, Hannah found a bundle resting on her porch rail. She opened it to reveal a hand-carved necklace of bone and turquoise. A single raven feather and a wave-shaped stone lay at its center. Takakota stood a few yards away, in the shadows. Water is spirit, he said. Bond between lives. The stone means you are not alone. She wore it to bed. The next morning, Hannah pulled on her finest dress. Black, ironed, pinned. She hadn't worn it since James's funeral. She secured the letter inside her satchel and walked toward the barn. Takakota was already there, saddling 2 horses. He didn't ask where they were going, he simply nodded. They rode side by side into town, past the burned chicken coop, past the hill where the Apache had once stood guard, past fences he had helped her mend. By the time they reached the square, townspeople had already gathered. Brody stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, mouth twisted into a knowing grin. His men loitered near the saloon, hands on pistols, eyes sharp. Well, Brody sneered, if it isn't the ranch widow and her tame savage. Hannah didn't break stride. She marched straight to the courthouse steps where Judge Leland waited with a folder in his hand. You said you'd look into the letter, she said. Leland nodded. I did. He held up the document. There was no deed filed, no signatures, Just intention. Legally, the land remains yours. Gasps whispered through the crowd. Brody stepped forward, face red. She forged it. You can't trust a woman like her, living out there with one of them. She's a liar, one of Brody's men shouted. That warrior's dangerous. I bet she planned the whole thing. Judge Leland held up a hand. Enough. I'll not entertain hearsay over ink and blood. Brody's hand moved fast. Too fast. A pistol appeared. The crowd froze, but Takakota moved faster. Before Brody's finger could touch the trigger, Takakota struck his arm. The shot fired wild, whistling past Hannah's shoulder. Screams erupted. Panic scattered. Brody fell. To the ground with Takakota's knee on his chest and a blade at his throat. Still no words. Judge Leland's voice boomed. Let him go. Takakota looked to Hannah. She gave a single nod. He rose, Brody gasped and rolled away, humiliated. No one helped him. The crowd murmured, watching silently as Judge Leland turned back to Hannah. The land is yours, he said. Fully. Permanently. She nodded. Thank you. She turned to walk away, Takakota falling into step beside her. The townspeople parted to let them pass. No one called her name. No one threw a stone. Not anymore. That night, the ranch was quiet. The kind of quiet that meant survival. Hannah brought out 2 tin mugs of coffee and joined Takakota by the fire. I thought I'd lose everything, she said. You found something instead, he replied. What? He hesitated. Then, someone. She looked at him. I used to think strength meant silence, holding everything in, surviving alone. Sometimes it does, he said, but not forever. He nodded. The fire crackled, the stars blinked, and for the first time in years, Hannah felt like the ground beneath her feet wasn't something to fight, but something to share. In the days that followed, change arrived slowly. A child left wildflowers on her fence post. An old woman brought eggs from her coop. Maddox returned on horseback, alone this time. I'm not here on business, he said, removing his hat. Just checking in. She offered him coffee. He declined. Then added, the council voted. They won't press anything, not now. He glanced toward the barn where Takakota was mending a wheelbarrow. He ever going to leave? Hannah looked over her shoulder. He already has a place. Maddox grunted. Guess he does. That night, Hannah leaned against Takakota's shoulder, their bodies quiet in the glow of firelight. Do you miss your old life? She asked. He didn't answer for a long time. Yes, he said. But this is something new. They sat listening to the wind, to the soft creak of the well, to the silence that now felt like home. Sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't ride in with guns or speeches. They arrive quietly, with water, with protection, with shared labor and earned trust. A storm had passed, and in its wake something strong had taken root. Purpose, offer resolution, poetic closure, and emotional payoff. T's next possible arc. The fire had long since burned down to embers, but Hannah and Takakota remained seated by it, wrapped in silence and soft starlight. The porch behind them creaked gently in the night breeze, and beyond it the hills of Dry Hollow whispered in the dark. No longer threatening, only watchful. They didn't speak often these days. They didn't need to. It wasn't silence born of distance. It was the sound of peace, the kind earned through fire and blood and choice. Takakota held a piece of leather in his lap, fingers threading bone beads through it slowly. Beside him, Hannah sipped from her mug, coffee stronger than usual, almost bitter, but she liked it that way tonight. It reminded her she was still here. You ever miss your old life? She asked, not looking at him. He didn't answer right. Away. The night stretched wide. An owl called from the edge of the property. Yes, he said at last. But this is something new. She nodded. It is. In that moment she realized she no longer thought of the ranch as hers alone. It didn't belong to James. It didn't belong to Brody. It didn't even belong to the county ledgers in some courthouse drawer. It belonged to the hands that worked, to the souls that protected it, and the hearts that refused to abandon it. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. He didn't stay because he owed her. He stayed because he chose to. That night, she walked to the well alone. The wind had picked up, dry but not cruel. She looked down into the water and saw her reflection distorted by ripples. Behind her, she heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. Takakota. She turned and he offered a small pouch wrapped in cloth. She opened it slowly. Inside was another carving, this time a water bird, its wings outstretched, its body smooth and curved like a river. Water carries memory, he said. This one carries you. She didn't cry, but she came close. Back on the porch they sat until the lantern burned out. The stars pulsed above like ancient eyes watching something important, something sacred. Sometimes leadership doesn't look like a CEO in a tower. Sometimes it's a widow with a tin cup, a warrior with scars, and a ranch that refused to fall. Sometimes it's not the noise that changes everything. It's the quiet, a look, a word, a choice to stay. As the night deepened, Hannah leaned her head against his shoulder again. He didn't move. I used to think peace meant everything was finished, she said softly. He glanced at her. Peace is not an end. It is a beginning. She smiled faintly. Then maybe we've only just begun. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. And somewhere on the horizon where the land met the stars, something stirred. Teaser ending line. But peace, like water, never stays still for long. And Dry Hollow hadn't seen its last storm.